You know that feeling when you think you've got it all figured out? You've worked hard, you've built a life, and you've convinced yourself that love will just work out as long as you put in the effort. That was me. Or at least I thought it was. When I met Emily, everything just clicked. We didn't even have to try. We were like two pieces of a puzzle that fit together perfectly. We had the same sense of humor, the same ambitions. I honestly thought this was it. We were going to build a life together, and it was going to be amazing. We'd talk for hours about where we'd live, the kind of life we'd build. I remember planning out our retirement like we were already there, sipping coffee on the porch, watching our grandkids run around. We even talked about taking that trip to Italy in our 50s. I thought, we have it all figured out. The perfect relationship. The perfect future. But then something started to shift. At first, I couldn't even pinpoint it. It was just this feeling that things weren't as easy as they once were. And I couldn't understand why. Here's the thing, they don't tell you this in movies. Relationships aren't as simple as following a set of rules. And in my case, I didn't realize that yet. When Emily and I first got together, everything felt effortless. You know that feeling when you find someone who gets you? She made me feel seen in a way no one else had. And I thought that was it. I thought, this is the person I'm going to grow old with. All the little things that people say will make a relationship work, like sharing goals, being on the same page, supporting each other. Well, Emily and I had all of that. We'd talk about our future like we had it mapped out. House in the suburbs, maybe a dog, a couple of kids running around. We'd go on vacations, make memories, and then in our later years, we'd just enjoy the simple life. I imagined us growing old together, with our lives tied up in this perfect package, and I guess for a while it was. It was easy. It was safe. I never questioned it because why would I? Everything was falling into place. Or at least, it seemed like it was. But that's the thing about perfection. It's easy to mistake it for reality when you're in the middle of it. And I didn't see the cracks starting to form. I was too focused on the dream, the vision of what I thought our life was going to be. And then, little by little, Emily started to change. At first, I didn't even notice it. Or maybe I didn't want to. She wasn't as present as she used to be. We weren't laughing as much, and the conversations about our future? They started to feel like we were talking about someone else's life. And I thought, is this just a phase? Maybe I'm overthinking it. It's probably nothing. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I should have paid attention sooner. Because soon enough, I couldn't ignore it anymore. And when I look back now, I can see that things weren't as perfect as I thought they were. But back then, I couldn't see the cracks forming beneath the surface. I remember the first time I really noticed something was wrong. It wasn't one big moment, it was 1,000 small moments that started to add up, things I couldn't explain away anymore. At first, it was little things. Emily wasn't as present as she used to be. She'd get lost in her phone during dinner, or she'd be distracted when we were together. I'd tell myself it was just the stress of work, or maybe she was tired, or just having an off day. But as the days went by, it kept happening. And the more it happened, the more that quiet voice inside my head grew louder. Something's not right. I tried to ignore it. I told myself I was being paranoid. After all, we'd been together for years. Relationships go through phases, right? People have their ups and downs. But the weird part was, the more I tried to brush it off, the more I started to feel like I was losing her. It wasn't just the little things anymore. She seemed different. The spark we once had was starting to fade, and no matter how hard I tried to rekindle it, it just wouldn't catch. It was like trying to light a fire in the rain. The harder I pushed, the more distant she became. And that distance, whatever it was growing by the day. I'd ask her if everything was okay, but she would just smile and say, "Yeah, I'm fine. Don't worry about it." But I could see it in her eyes. The way she wouldn't quite meet my gaze. The way she'd say nothing when I knew something was bothering her. She wasn't being herself. She was pulling away slowly, but surely. and I was starting to question everything I thought I knew about us. The first time I asked her directly, "Are you sure everything's okay?" She got defensive. "Why are you always so worried?" she snapped. "You're overthinking it." But I wasn't overthinking it. At least I didn't think I was. Something felt off. And when she said that, it felt like a red flag. She wasn't just dismissing my concerns, she was shutting me down. And that scared me more than I wanted to admit. But it didn't stop there. The more I tried to ignore it, the more the cracks began to show. I noticed her spending more time out of the house, even though we used to spend most evenings together. She'd go out with friends, or she'd go for walks on her own, things she never used to do. And when I asked her where she was, she'd say, "I just needed some time to myself." Time to herself? That felt like a strange thing to hear from someone who used to tell me everything. We always shared everything, no matter how trivial. So why was she pulling away now? I started to feel like an outsider in my own relationship. Like I didn't even know her anymore. When we were together, there was this tension in the air. We'd be sitting in the same room, but I'd feel like we were miles apart. The conversations felt forced, like we were just going through the motions. And whenever I tried to bring up anything serious, anything real, about us, about our future, she'd just brush it off. She'd smile and change the subject, or worse, she'd give me that "you're overreacting" look. The kind of look that made me feel like I was crazy for feeling something was wrong. And then, there was the weird distance in her touch. At first, I chalked it up to being tired, or maybe she was just distracted. But over time, I noticed it more. When I reached for her hand, she'd pull away, or she'd let me hold it, but it didn't feel the same. The warmth wasn't there anymore. The spark wasn't there anymore. I'd kiss her, and it felt like kissing a stranger. And every time I felt that coldness between us, it was like a sharp reminder that something wasn't right. I tried to push through it. I tried to keep the flame alive by planning dates, making little gestures, flowers, dinners, surprises, but none of it seemed to matter. I would look at her during dinner, at the way she looked down at her phone, lost in something else, and I wondered, what's going on? Who are you talking to? It was the smallest things, but my mind started to race. Was she talking to someone else? Was she losing interest in me? Was she falling out of love with me? I tried to shake these thoughts out of my head, but they kept coming back, and that's when I started to get suspicious. I found myself looking over her shoulder when she was texting, wondering if she was hiding something. If she was talking to someone else, someone who could give her the attention I couldn't seem to hold on to. I hated myself for thinking that way, but the doubts were creeping in. They gnawed at me, day after day. I started to question everything I knew about us. The late nights, the sudden need for more space, the way she stopped talking to me about her day. I became obsessed with the idea that something was wrong. But every time I tried to talk to her, to get her to open up, she would brush me off. "Why are you so worried? You're acting crazy," she'd say. But deep down, I knew something had changed. Something inside her had shifted, and I wasn't sure if I could find my way back to her. If there was even a way to fix it. It felt like I was standing on the edge of a cliff, watching the ground crumble beneath me, but unable to turn away. I didn't know if I was just paranoid or if she was really pulling away. I didn't know if I could fix this, or if I even should. And the more I tried to push for answers, the more she pulled away. It felt like a game I couldn't win. The days after the breakup were some of the darkest I've ever faced. I thought I was prepared for the pain. I thought I made the decision. I know it's for the best. I'll move on. But nothing could have prepared me for how much it would hurt. There's a strange thing that happens when you lose someone you love. It's not just the absence of their presence, it's the absence of everything they represented in your life. Suddenly, there was so much space. Too much. The bed felt too big without her in it. The house, once filled with her laughter and her little quirks, felt hollow. And the worst part? I kept replaying everything in my mind, like a broken record. Did I do the right thing? Was this my fault? I kept asking myself those questions over and over. And every time I thought I had an answer, Another wave of doubt would hit. I couldn't stop thinking about the last time I saw her. How she walked out of that door, how she hesitated before she said goodbye. Like there was something she wanted to say, but couldn't. And then she was gone. That finality hit me harder than anything else. Because it wasn't just about losing her, it was about losing the version of myself that I had been with her. The us that no longer existed. I wasn't just grieving the loss of her, I was grieving the loss of who I thought I was with her by my side. Every time I saw a couple walking hand in hand, it felt like a punch to the gut. I didn't want to feel sorry for myself. But I couldn't stop the jealousy. It wasn't just jealousy over the relationship. It was jealousy over how easy it looked for them. They didn't have to make the hard decisions. They didn't have to face the same kind of pain I was feeling. They got to keep their love, and I didn't. I remember going to bed one night, feeling like the whole world was closing in on me. I had this thought that maybe this was all my fault. Maybe if I'd been more patient, more understanding, more forgiving, she wouldn't have needed space in the first place. Maybe if I had communicated better, or listened more closely, we wouldn't have ended up here. The what-ifs were suffocating me. What if I'd said the right thing that night? What if I hadn't asked for space when I did? What if? What if? What if? But what really broke me, the thing I hadn't prepared for, was the loneliness. The feeling that no matter what I did, I couldn't escape it. It wasn't just physical loneliness, it was emotional. I had spent so long in a relationship where I thought we could always talk things out, always work through things together. And now, I was sitting in this void. Alone. No answers. No one to share my frustrations with. No one to share my hopes or my fears. I felt like I was floating in this empty space with no anchor to hold me down. Even the smallest things reminded me of her. Her favorite song came on the radio, and I couldn't turn it off fast enough. But then, later, I'd find myself searching for that song again, because I missed her. I wanted to hear that connection again. I wanted the comfort of hearing something familiar, something that reminded me of when everything was okay. When I wasn't so lost. And the hardest part was realizing that there was nothing I could do to change it. I couldn't undo what had happened. I couldn't fix it. She had made her choice. I had made mine. And as much as I wanted to crawl back to her, to apologize, to take everything back and start over, I knew I couldn't. Not if I wanted to respect her. Not if I wanted to respect myself. But there were moments when I was so desperate to make the pain stop, I would think about calling her. I'd write out texts that I never sent, begging her to come back, telling her I missed her. I was stuck in this emotional whirlpool, unable to escape it, just spinning around in circles. My heart was breaking, and I couldn't see a way out, and then there were the nights when it felt like it was all too much. I'd lie awake, staring at the ceiling, feeling like I was suffocating. That tightness in my chest wouldn't go away. It felt like the world was closing in on me. I kept telling myself that eventually I'd feel better. That eventually the pain would fade. But it didn't. It just stayed. And no matter how much I wanted to escape it, it was always there, lurking, reminding me of the weight of the choice I had made. I didn't know it at the time, but I was learning a painful lesson. Grief doesn't follow a timeline. It doesn't obey rules. It doesn't just go away when you think it should. It hangs around quietly but relentlessly, until you're strong enough to face it head on. And for the first time, I realized that sometimes, the only way through the pain is to sit in it. To let it wash over you. Because you can't heal from something you refuse to acknowledge. It was in those moments, when I felt like I couldn't take any more, that I began to understand something deeper, sometimes. The pain is necessary. It's a part of the process. It's the weight that comes with loving someone, with putting yourself out there, with allowing yourself to be vulnerable. And as much as I hated feeling like this, I knew that if I ever wanted to get through it, I had to let the pain run its course. I remember sitting there, in the living room, staring at the phone. My heart was pounding so loudly in my chest that I could barely hear the voice in my head telling me what I already knew. Emily had been pulling away for a while now. And I could feel it. I could feel the distance between us like it was a physical barrier, something I couldn't break down no matter how hard I tried. I tried to reach out, tried to make things better, but every attempt felt like it made things worse. She wasn't the same. We weren't the same. And deep down, I knew that. But I didn't want to admit it. I kept telling myself, if I just keep trying, if I keep putting in the effort, everything will work out. But that's when the real truth hit me. Love isn't something you can force. You can't just keep pushing and expect everything to turn out okay. At first, I thought maybe it was just a phase. Maybe she just needed some space, like people say. But it wasn't a phase. She wasn't looking for space, she was looking for something else. I wasn't sure what it was, but I could see it in her eyes, hear it in her voice every time we talked. She was different, and I was different too. Something had changed between us, and no matter how much I wanted to fight it, I couldn't ignore it anymore. One night, after another awkward conversation where we both danced around the obvious, I just couldn't take it anymore. I realized that I had no idea how to fix this. I couldn't keep pretending that everything was okay when it wasn't. So I asked her, Emily, what's really going on here? And for the first time, she didn't give me an answer. She just stared at me like she didn't even recognize me anymore. And in that moment, I realized she wasn't the one who had changed. I had changed too. The man I was before, the man who thought love was about staying together no matter what, was gone. And maybe it was time to let go of that version of myself too. She said she needed space. And I just froze. Space? Was she asking for a break? Was this the end of us? Was I losing her for good? I don't think I fully processed what she was saying at first. It was like my brain was short-circuiting. All I knew was that the thing I feared most was happening. But instead of fighting it, I felt a strange sense of calm. I realized that I couldn't keep forcing a connection that wasn't there anymore. I had to let her go. To be honest, the hardest part wasn't hearing those words. It was knowing that if I did this, I might never get her back. The fear of losing her completely, of closing the door on everything we had built together, it felt suffocating. But deep down, I also knew that holding on to something that wasn't working wasn't helping either of us. Letting go felt like betrayal. I kept asking myself, what if I'm making the biggest mistake of my life? What if I'm giving up too easily? What if this is just a rough patch? But I had to face the facts. It wasn't a rough patch. It wasn't going to get better by just trying harder. I had to make the decision, even if it broke me. I knew deep down that if I loved her, I had to let her go. The moment I said the words, I think we need to break up, it felt like the ground was ripped out from under me. My chest felt tight, and I could barely catch my breath. But I also knew something important in that moment. I was doing what needed to be done, even though it hurt. I was letting go of the dream of us together. Not because I didn't love her, but because I loved her enough to let her find herself again, to let her have the space she clearly needed. After I said it, she didn't say much. She didn't argue, didn't beg me to take it back. She just nodded. That was the hardest part of all. The silence after the decision. There was nothing left to say. And in that silence, I realized something that was both painful and liberating. Sometimes, love isn't enough. And sometimes, breaking up is the only way for both people to heal. Even though I felt broken, I knew it wasn't the end of the world. It wasn't the end of love. It was just the end of the chapter we had written together. And maybe that was the beginning of something new. For both of us. After we broke up, the silence was deafening. It was like a weight I couldn't shake. I thought that, maybe, after some time apart, I'd feel a sense of relief. Maybe it'd feel like I'd made the right choice. But all I felt was emptiness. I missed her more than I ever thought I could miss someone. I tried to keep busy, fill my days with work and distractions, but it didn't work. Everywhere I looked, there were reminders of her, songs, places we'd gone together, even the small things like her favorite mug sitting on the kitchen counter. I thought I'd moved on, but I hadn't. It felt like there was this giant hole inside me that nothing could fill, and I couldn't understand it. I thought I was doing the right thing. I told myself, this is what's best for both of us. But deep down, I kept wondering, was it? Did I make the right choice? Or did I just mess everything up? Was I really ready to let go of someone who meant so much to me? I hated the silence. I hated how lonely I felt. And as much as I tried to push the doubt aside, it kept coming back, nagging at me. What if I was wrong? What if I wasn't supposed to let her go? What if I could have fixed things, but there was no going back? Emily wasn't there anymore. And the worst part? I couldn't even talk to her. We had broken up, but the sense of loss didn't feel like something I could just move past. I didn't know how to live without her. And in a way, it felt like I was living in a fog, waiting for the clarity to come. Then, one evening, I got a call. I wasn't expecting it. To be honest, I didn't even know if I wanted it. It had been a few months since we'd broken up, and I hadn't heard from Emily. So when my phone rang, I almost didn't answer, but I did. And when I heard her voice on the other end, I froze. She said, "Ryan, I just wanted to thank you." Thank me? For what? I didn't understand. I didn't know what she was talking about. We hadn't spoken since the breakup, so why was she calling now? I was silent for a moment, trying to process what she was saying. And then she explained. I needed space to figure myself out, to grow. And you gave me that. I don't know if I would have figured things out if you hadn't let me go. I couldn't believe it. All that time I'd spent feeling like I was the one who had failed, like I had done something wrong. And now she was thanking me for giving her the freedom to figure out what she needed. It was surreal. I never expected this call. I never expected her to reach out like this. And honestly, I didn't know what to say. But I heard the sincerity in her voice, and it hit me. This wasn't about me holding on tighter. It was about her needing to find herself. And in giving her the space to do that, I had done something right. As I hung up the phone, I sat there in silence for a long time. The whole conversation was a shock, but it also gave me a sense of clarity that I hadn't felt in months. Emily had grown. She needed that space. And I needed it too. In a way, I had been holding on to this ideal of love that didn't allow either of us to breathe. I had been suffocating us both, not realizing that love isn't about control, it's about freedom. I finally understood that. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that sometimes, the best thing you can do for someone you love is to let them go. Not forever, but just enough to let them find their own path. To give them the space to grow, to learn. To become who they're supposed to be. I thought love was about keeping everything together, about making everything perfect. But what I learned was that true love isn't about perfection. It's about trust. It's about having the confidence to let go, knowing that the love you have for each other can survive distance. Maybe even grow stronger because of it. I learned to trust the process. Trust that sometimes, stepping away is what allows both people to grow into who they need to be. And that's what I had done without even realizing it. A few months after that call, Emily and I met up. It wasn't a grand reunion like the movies. We didn't fall back into each other's arms and pretend like nothing had happened. But there was something different this time. Something real. We sat down, had coffee, and talked. And for the first time, it didn't feel like we were just talking about the past or rehashing old wounds. We talked about the people we had become. We talked about the things we had learned, and the way we had grown during our time apart. It wasn't about fixing things. It was about understanding that we had changed, and that's okay. We didn't have to go back to what we had before. We could create something new, something better because we weren't the same people we had been. I don't know what the future holds. But I do know that what I thought was a failure turned out to be one of the best things that ever happened to both of us. And if we hadn't given each other that space, I don't think we would have gotten here. And I think, for the first time in a long time, I understood what real love was all about. Not the fantasy, not the perfect picture, but something deeper. Something real. So, what's the lesson here? Sometimes, the hardest thing to do in a relationship is to let go. You think that holding on will keep things together, But the truth is, sometimes it's about letting go long enough to let the other person grow. Love isn't about control. It's not about keeping someone in your grip. It's about giving them the freedom to be themselves, to figure things out, even if that means taking a step back. And that's not easy. But it's real. So, if you're in a relationship right now and things aren't going the way you want, maybe it's time to take a step back. Give each other space. It might just be the thing that helps you both grow and become the people you're meant to be. Because love, real love, isn't about holding on too tightly. It's about trust. It's about letting go, knowing that the bond between you is strong enough to survive distance. And sometimes, that distance is what makes it stronger.